I just wanted to say hello and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's presentation, Ekphrastic Adventures, Writing in Response to Photography with the amazing John Paul Caponigro. Um, Before we dive in, I just wanted to take a quick look at what's coming up at the International Photography Hall of Fame. Let's see. First up, our annual photo competition, Vision and Viewpoint, launches May 20th. This open call is judged by Amanda Smith and Kevin Tully of the A. Smith Gallery and is open to photographers of all levels. It includes cash prizes, plus a chance to be featured in an online exhibition at iphf.org. Then on June 28th, we're excited to welcome St. Louis-based photographer Emily Moore for a hands-on lighting workshop enhancing the ambience. She'll show us how to mix studio strobes with candlelight and other ambient light sources to create beautifully moody portraits. You can find details on these and more upcoming events at iphf.org. And while you're there, be sure to check out the 2025 Hall of Fame inductees and info about this fall's gala that's coming up. It's going to be an amazing night of photography, and we hope that you can join us there. Now on to tonight's event. I'm pleased to hand things over to Elizabeth Sanwan. She's a member of IPHF's board of directors and accomplished visual artist whose work explores cultural connection and environmental storytelling. Elizabeth, ready for you to take it away.
Thank you, Stephen. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be able to introduce John Paul Caponigro, somebody that I've admired for a long time. I can't remember the first workshop I took with him, but it was amazing. And if you have not had the opportunity to interact with this gentleman, this Renaissance man, the knower of all things, I would say do it. Go on a trip to White Sands with him, which I did, and just the conversations and discussions that he has throughout the trip and in the evenings, aside from photographing next to you, are just life-changing. And I did a print workshop with him also at his home, which was again fabulous because you get to be with his amazing wife, which is absolutely a plus. So, if you haven't had the opportunity to be with him in person, I would suggest that you make time to do so. And I don't want to take any further time. JP, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you. I am tickled pink to be with you this evening and look forward to hearing everything you have to say.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's just such a personal, warm welcome. It's great to have that shared history. Really seemed to come from the heart. Thank you. That's great. Great. Um, Fair amount to cover here. I think I'm going to jump right into resources, including what the heck is ekphrastic. So let's just jump right into that. Want to alert you to some resources. Um, I'm on the board of the Camden Festival of Poetry now in its third year. We have wonderful poets like Richard Blanco and this year Jane Hirschfield come and read for us, as well as local Maine poets. And for the next 2 weeks, I'm visiting Maine museums and having conversations about art with poetry. But I really want to frame this as writing because you're going to see that I'm going to be emphasizing creative writing, and that could be prose or poetry, or maybe the prose poem, but we'll get into that a little bit later. On my website, on my blog right now, you'll see for the Camden Festival of Poetry, at the bottom of that is a set of resources. This QR code will take you there as well. But if you haven't got that yet, just go to my blog for this post. And at the bottom of that post, which kind of gives a whole schedule, there's a whole set of resources. Now, this screenshot is 10 days old, so I've actually added in one or two resources I'm going to alert you to. They're up there on the website right now. This is things that relate to photographers. This is classic ekphrastic poems. These are literary journals that share ekphrastic writing. And if you write some, you might want to share your work publicly. And at the very bottom, also responses to my art. I actually said, okay, so you're writing ekphrastic poetry, ekphrastic writing, creative nonfiction. Put yourself in the same shoes. See what it's like to find out what people say in relationship to your image. And it's really quite fascinating. Anyway, a lot of resources there. By signing up for this tonight, you're automatically part of the newsletter that I send out. The newsletter gives you free access to all of the resources on my website. And in fact, these writing resources here are really built for photographers more than they are for writers. How we can use writing and words to unlock a lot of creativity in our process, to find ideas, to find connections between things, to try and figure it out what it is we have to say and what's unique about the way that we say it. You know, a lot of times you'll hear photographers resist saying things. You know, pictures should be seen and not heard. Does that ever really happen? Almost all images have titles, even untitled is a title. And then when I run my workshops, like Elizabeth was mentioning, sometimes it's the conversations that are the most life-changing for me as well. And having a good conversation around images, knowing how to direct good questions, where to follow them, how to unlock some of our gut feelings. All of this is about using words. You know, a lot of times you're looking for good feedback from somebody. How do you get that? Usually from words. It's not usually, oh, a portfolio review and somebody plays you a violin or does an interpretive dance in response to your images. This whole field of ekphrasis is expanding, and it is going beyond the writing that has started it. So this mouthful, ekphrasis, potato. I think it is actually ekphrasis, though most of them say ekphrasis, just like most people say Caponigro, but it's really Caponigro. Yeah, okay. If it sounds like Greek to you, well, it is. It's Greek for description. It's using words to describe a piece of art. It's going pretty far back. My theory is it's the original word camera because one of the original ones that I'll mention is Homer's description of Achilles' shield, where there are no cameras back there. So imagine Keats is going to Rome and he wants to describe this Roman sculpture that he sees, or Rilke, and there's no camera. How is he going to describe it to somebody else? He uses his words. Um, I consider it less a genre and more a mode of inquiry. And that's really important because one of the things I want to emphasize tonight is the process more than the finished product. And of course, we're going to do a generative writing exercise as we move further on through this presentation. And I want you to resist the temptation to rush to finish results or to try and be perfect, because usually perfect is the enemy of the good. And early in the process, it often shuts down the creative process. I also wanted to mention that this field of inquiry is just starting to expand even into the sciences, into psychology, and even into biology, other ways. Scientists are trying to find ways to message their data in really compelling ways, and they're turning to creative writing. That the writing that they do is not as dry. It doesn't have to be quite so logical, and it might involve all of the senses. Whether you think there are 5, 12, or 44 depends on which scientist you're talking to. Um, so it can be an internal dialogue. It can be purely personal that you don't share with somebody else. It can also be a wonderful way of sharing a conversation with a close friend. It can be a way of making a public statement about your response to somebody else's work. It could be also writing something that accompanies your work. What I'd encourage you not to do is to make it let it render your photographs, illustrations. Though I think we can look at the long history in photography, say in National Geographic, the blending of the essay along with the photo essay and how the two create a wonderful synergy between the two. And it's that synergy I would encourage you to look for. So we might ask why we write it. First, to connect. I think slowing down enough to select a single object that you might write about and to consider it carefully encourages you, just like picking up the camera, to look, not only to look, but to sense all your senses, sense into it more deeply. I think this connects to the slow looking. You know, there's slow cooking, and in museums now there's slow looking. There's this movement of trying to get people to slow down, pick a few things, and really savor them. Language can be a way of savoring them. Jeff Shiwe is here tonight, and he's been around Greg Gorman, who has this wonderful vocabulary about wine and has opened up worlds to me. I think, yeah, okay, this wine's better than that wine, but how? And he's got this whole vocabulary. Same kind of thing with developing a vocabulary for how images work. So there's a sense of connection, of savoring, of reaching into. And along with that comes discoveries, things that might be under the surface of your conscious mind, the gut feelings, and even what you might connect them to, things that you might associate them with, memories, um, any number of creative moves that might be made. All of this, if you shape it into something that you share, um, can expand the art experience for you, and if you share it for others. Remember, sharing is optional. A couple of questions to ask. How is it ekphrastic? We're going to do an exercise that focuses on three different aspects: content, form, and feeling, that all images share, but we can direct our focus to one or the other. Language can be a lens. The other question is, how ekphrastic is it? And what I mean by that is, some artists, some writers will just respond to a piece of art and just leap off into this fiction that has very little to do with the original work of art. It becomes a personal statement, and the art object was just a catalyst for it. Maybe that's 1% ekphrastic. On the other hand, in the other end of the spectrum, some people might stick very closely to just describing the art and not put a lot of personal interpretation in it. Usually the magic happens somewhere in between. Talk a little bit more about that. I also want to talk a little bit about how form, the form of writing that you take, shapes the experience that you're having. And there are certain forms, like prose poem and like haiku, or very minimalist poetry, that are more practical, at least in an art viewing environment. Some of them larger, more complicated poetic forms might not be the thing that you want to practice in the museum. We'll get to that. When I say what's the prompt, that also means, like, what kind of question are you asking? That's also, how is it ekphrastic in its own way? And finally, can it stand on its own? If the piece of writing that you ended up with just doesn't really work without the image, well, maybe it could be a stronger piece of writing. Similarly, if the images that you're making require the text to be strong, intelligible, make their full statement, maybe the images could be stronger. And this can also be used to test the photographs that we make. Right? What more could I add into the images? And how does the text do something a little differently than the image, or very differently? So a couple of key questions there, not to answer definitively, and while it can be applied to specific images, I think these are general questions that can be asked for a lifetime as you move through making images and writing. They're guideposts. They help us make our way through it. So I want to just kind of give you an arc of some of the classic ekphrastic poems in the history of this medium, and then I'll read you a few as well. These are the ones that I listed on the website. From single poems at the beginning to, there's a couple of books at the end. Dean Rader wrote an entire book on Cy Twombly's work, really fascinating thing. And he reproduced Twombly's paintings along with the poems that he wrote side by side, where Victoria Chang came up with her own graphic sketches that were on top of the poems that she wrote in response to Agnes Martin's poetry. So it's really kind of fascinating interplay. And I think that's one of the interesting things. There's this interplay between them. So this is a picture of the shield of Achilles that Homer described, only this was made probably in the 1800s, and Homer was long ago in BC times. Very interesting to think of this sculpture being made long after, in response to Homer's text. The shield no longer existed. In fact, the shield may or may not have been a mythical object. Really quite fascinating to see this, again, interplay between arts and also between the ages. If you ever look at that passage in the Odyssey, in the Iliad, and then you compare it to W.H. Auden's poem written around in the middle of the 20th century, where World War I, World War II very much casting a shadow over the human psyche. His response to the whole thing is so different. It's so fascinating to see this echo through the ages. We learn a lot. This is a classic one, one that people refer to frequently. It's Keats' Ode to a Grecian Urn. Wonderful poem. Recommend you read it. Not long, but it's also Keats' sketch. I think it's fascinating. And we might think about our own journals here. We might be taking a snap with our smartphones and then using that as a notation in perhaps a notes app. I write most of my poetry first and take most of my notes on my phone. And sometimes I actually use the dictation features and I just speak into it rather than typing things out. It changes the process. I encourage you to use any tool that comes to hand and to carry things with you so that you develop a habit of catching the ideas that you come across. Rilke's very famous archaic torso of Apollo is really a fascinating thing and an interesting story behind it. He was helping the sculptor Rodin, and Rodin was saying, you know, your poetry is pretty abstract. You might want to start writing poems about things. And this is one of the first ones he did. And of course, it's probably his most famous poem and one of the most famous ekphrastic poems as well. Again, short, beautiful. His whole response, this beautiful long poem, and the final ending line, "You must change your life." Well, I think it points out that art can change our lives, and that the very act of engaging in trying to respond to art can also change our lives. It can deepen it, it can enrich it, it can open up new perspectives, it can create inspiration. We can have a great conversation about it. Art does so much. Blake, which came first, the image or the words, the tiger or the prose? That's a debate that'll go on for a long time. Another one I'd love to point you to is Anne Sexton's poem about Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night. And also to mention that Starry, Starry Night has been written about, well, let me rephrase that, not about, in response to. There have been more ekphrastic responses to Van Gogh's Starry Night than any other. I think Hokusai's Wave comes in at second, and Mona Lisa probably a close third. Yusa Kuminyaka's absolutely wonderful poem on the Vietnam Memorial is probably one of my favorites. And this one I'm going to read to you because it is so wonderful. And it also raises an important quality that I want to emphasize on this. So this is by Yusuf Kuminyaka. And I'm going to give you the backstory before I read it, just because we're short on time. And I want to just sort of emphasize how complicated it is, and you might listen for what's in the poem and what's not, an important consideration. So here's Yusuf Kumanyaka, an African-American Vietnam vet, going to the Vietnam Memorial, this long, black, shiny monument with, well, he'll list how many thousands of names, 58,022 names, in the backdrop of a very white Washington, D.C. This monument was created, or at least designed, by an Asian woman artist, Maya Lin. Do you see how complicated this has already got just by the actual object itself? But then here's this Vietnam vet, and can you imagine how he might feel like, okay, my name's not up there because I didn't die. Is that a good thing? Like, where's my immortality? Like, you see how loaded this all gets. I mean, it's fabulous. But then listen to how he responds to this, or at least what he shares of his response, because certainly there's a lot more going on than he shares. And the art of selectivity, and one of the great things about poetry in particular, but also any kind of prose that's short, like flash or lyric essay, is its compact quality. It just gets to the point, it cuts to the chase, without sacrificing a lot of texture and personal experience. Here it is. It's called Facing It. My black face fades, hiding inside the black granite. I said I wouldn't. Damn it. No tears. I'm stone, I'm flesh. My clouded reflection eyes me like a bird of prey. The profile of night slanted against morning. I turn this way. The stone lets me go. I turn that way. I'm inside. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, again, depending on the light, to make a difference. I go down the 58,022 names, half expecting to find my own in letters of smoke. I touch the name Andrew Johnson. I see the booby trap's white flash. Names shimmer on a woman's blouse. But when she walks away, the names stay on the wall. Brushstrokes flash. A red bird's wings cutting across my stare. The sky. a plane in the sky. A white Bet's image floats closer to me. Then his pale eyes look through mine. I'm a window. He's lost his right arm. Inside the stone. In the black mirror, a woman's trying to erase names. No, she's brushing a boy's hair. I think one of the other questions that we want to ask ourselves is how much of ourselves do we put in it? He has a particular relationship. I could not write this poem. I'm not a Vietnam vet. He has a particular experience that he can bring to this experience. I would select other things to write about. I'm absolutely delighted that he shared his experience, and it lets me into the Vietnam vet's experience, a public installation like this. It gets me to be thinking more about the whole thing, maybe do a little bit of research. It calls to a lot of things, and I think that's one of the great things. This poem doesn't say everything, but it certainly says a lot, and it gives you the feeling, and he embodies it. It's personal. He's made it personal, and that's when things start getting really interesting. It's like the power of storytelling, and when you can start to make it personal without making it sentimental, when you can speak about your own direct experience, it carries a certain kind of authority, credibility, and connectiveness. We connect with one another because we share a human experience. And if you can get your human experience into the things you create, be they images or text, it's going to make a big difference for both you and for anyone who experiences the work that you produce. I want to segue to form. There's a lot that could be said about different poetic forms. Here, I want to emphasize brevity. Notice we didn't see a 5-page essay from Kumanyaka. We saw one little prose poem with 22 lines. I'm not sure how many words exactly, but it's short. It means it's quickly shareable. I can share that in less than a minute. I talked about it more than I actually read it. A lot of times it takes a lot of words to get down to that brevity. I'll get to whether you're, as Roy Peter Clark calls it, a putter inner or a taker outer. I love this terminology there. But as whether you write a lot while you're getting it all out and then cut it back, or whether you start to edit while you're writing. There's no right or wrong there. And in fact, I would encourage you to try both and to see what works for you. And it might change depending on what you're trying to do. But either way, it's important to cut out all the fluff, to get right to the point, to tell it in a really interesting way, to move on to new things once you've really covered it. Don't oversell it. This is, I'm not going to read it. William Strunk of, Strunk and White's classic there. Vigorous writing is concise. And Roy Peter Clark, who's got this wonderful book that I'm reading right now called How to Write Short. Now, Roy Peter Clark, I keep referencing him. He's kind of seminal in putting together the writing program at the Poynter Institute, one of America's finest journalism schools for both photojournalists and for writers. And the two talk. So he put himself in the position of simplifying that even further. He took what Strunk's short paragraph here and kind of boiled it down to 3 little sentences, write tight. A sentence can be long with detail, but every word must tell. That's really interesting. And it's fascinating. We can hear this thing from writers all the time. Show, don't tell. In other words, don't tell the reader how to feel. Take them on an experience. You might really be thinking about that. How do the words that you share give the reader a parallel experience to the images that you're responding to, whether they're yours or someone else's? That's really important. The whole show, don't tell. I'm not saying you can't tell. I'm just saying that you want to emphasize the show more. This is kind of the KISS principle. Keep it simple. Pick your favorite S word at the end there. But I always remember Einstein's quote there. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So there's a kind of an Occam's razor going on here, both in writing and in the photographs that we make as well. The great thing about photographs is they record so much detail. And the worst thing about photographs is they record so much detail. And the real question is what we leave in the frame, is that significant detail? And there's a lot of moves we make to minimize detail, to downplay it, to crop it out, to darken it, whatever it happens to be, limited depth of field. All of the moves that we make to kind of subdue information that's not essential to the story. We're so used to photographs showing so much detail that we've learned to read them differently. We kind of wade through that. But with text, we expect writers to be better editors and to only include the stuff that's essential. Yeah. Omit needless words, Mr. White. So I like this. Brevity comes from selection and not compression. In other words, it doesn't always have to be short, and it doesn't have to be a minimalist poem of 2 words or 3 lines, but we really want to avoid repeating ourselves. We really want to cut to the chase, and every word adds something new into it. So prose, poem, there's even the thing called the prose poem. Is it an essay that rests more on logical thought, making an argument for something? Is it a poem that rests more on an internal experience, emotional response? Or is it blended? And there is such a thing as the prose poem. And I recommend that you think about that as one of the forms to try, because as you see, you don't have to worry about line breaks. You don't have to worry about stanzas. You don't have to worry about rhyme schemes. There's still a musicality in between things. This is Richard Blanco's Cloud Anthem. And you'll see he's repeating the word until throughout the whole thing, kind of stitches the whole thing together, but it's in unpredictable places. It doesn't just come at the beginning of every new line. And that's fun too, to kind of set up a pattern, but then break the pattern in a meaningful way or give it a little twist. The form can often tell you a lot about how the writer is writing, and they can also tell you a lot about how the photographer is approaching their craft as well. So, we might ask ourselves, what makes prose poetic? Is it alliteration and consonance? Is it the sounds gluing things together? Is it rhythm? Is it that anaphora like Richard's until, kind of giving it a drum beat? Is it some of the flights of fancy or the large leaps that it makes? Is it the turning away from having to support everything logically and really rooting yourself in your body and giving the viewer a different kind of human experience rather than an up in your head rational experience? It makes space for a lot of different modes there, and there's no one way to do it. The way that you do it is offering a way of considering it and a way of relating for the reader, the viewer. So prose and poem, and in fact there's a wonderful Japanese form called haibun, which combines both prose. It's a travel guide. This is Basho, his narrow road to the interior. It combines a kind of a travel log along with haiku. And notice in this translation, you're seeing 4 lines, not 3. But you've got these short little poetic phrases that kind of comment on, but don't summarize. They provide just like I'm suggesting, the text and the image not repeat each other. They provide new experiences, but somehow related, kind of expanding their whole experience. And in this case, there's even images that you'll see here. Maybe he would have used snapshots if he had a camera back in the mid-1600s. There's a long tradition of combining haiku and images called haiga. So you can see this is all very hybrid and very fast evolving, put it that way. Haiku is another form that I would encourage you to explore, not because it's got so many rules. I mean, it's kind of funny that the shortest form of poetry might have the most rules, but because of its brevity, is really trying to get down to the essence of things. And there are many parallels to photography. I'll go through a couple of those in just a second. But here, this haiga of Basho's famous haiku, ancient pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. When Basho wrote that, he was primarily writing this kind of thing, and haiku wasn't its own independent form. That didn't happen until several hundred years later after. But it was a fragment of a larger poetic game that courtly Japanese practiced. It later became one of the most popular poetic forms. In fact, today I think it is the most popular, written on every continent and fast evolving. But notice 1 vertical line versus 3 lines here in the English version. There are one-line haikus, even some two-line haikus, once in a blue moon, a four-line haiku, but a five-line haiku is called a tanka. It becomes something else just because there's an accepted standard form. Again, if you can get it in 17 syllables or less, I was like this is actually 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, 5 in the third. So it's a haiku, but it's not particularly nature inspired. I'm not sure that there's any moment of inspiration. It's not really a haiku moment. It's really more of a formula. And I'd encourage you to steer away from that. Less than 17 syllables, possibly fewer than 3 lines. So there's something very interesting about the 3 lines. There's usually 2 longer pieces that hold 2 images together. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make a more important point while we're reading this piece of silliness. I think this is really, really funny. Ran out of syllables there. It is actually acceptable to go more than 17, but try not to. And if you can do it in fewer, then great. Not sure what, there we go. There are a lot of really interesting parallels between haiku and photography. One of them being they're very observation based. They're emphasizing a kind of a transparent style. You try and use very simple language. You simplify the language so much that you're not using rhyme, that there might be musicality between two different words that kind of share some sounds. There's no capitalization, there's no punctuation. It's very spare, and there's no editorialization. You're trying to avoid adjectives that tell the viewer how to feel or what to think, and you're arranging 2 elements. Could be a cherry blossom and a reflecting pond. Whatever the 2 elements happen to be, you're bringing them into a relationship, and something happens. That's that haiku moment. But the writer is not telling the reader what to feel or what to think. He's suggesting, he's setting up the environment for it. Sounds a lot like photography that is, quote, possibly styleless, that is transparent, that is recording the facts, that is more object-based. Maybe it's objective, maybe it's not. Very interesting to compare that. And also you look at photography's long relationship with prose, these essays, and how it can sometimes be used as illustration, and then sometimes there's a photo essay. Interesting we even call it an essay. So I want to encourage you to be thinking about the editing process, but you may not want to do that while you're writing. Getting critical while you're letting it all out is often the fastest way to shut down the creative juices. And in fact, I think you'll find that as well when you're using your cameras, that we need to make those images that challenge us, the things that we've never tried before. We're not sure quite why we're making them. We're going with our gut. We're letting our intuition guide us. We're trying to find that sense of flow where we're not just operating out of the mind. We're also activating all of the senses, at least 5 more. And that makes more connected pictures and sometimes more intelligent pictures because there's EQ and there's PQ, physical intelligence. We bring more to it, more to it. If you get interested in this form, these resources, I put a link to this with the resources on there. There's some wonderful books on haiku. You might just enjoy practicing them. I do recommend that if you do get into this writing mode, that you make it a habit, that you try and write something every day. Doesn't matter whether it's, pick your favorite form, pick your favorite style, subject, whatever you like, but just to be engaged in catching this. One of the reasons I love my iPhone is I use the notes to capture observations all day, every day. And so when I have an interesting thought in my head and I put it in the right note, come back to it. And so I catch a lot more ideas as well, but there's more to it than that. It's also because I know my subconscious knows I'm putting it somewhere, I'm doing something with it, I start noticing more things. And really, it just becomes a matter of controlling what quality of thought I want to have, and then I'll select the form or the medium appropriately. Very interesting to see how some poets will mirror the form of their subjects. In this case, this is Dean Rader. I mentioned he wrote an entire book of poetry in response to Cy Twombly's work and exhibit at Gagosian. And I loved how he used the stanzas to mirror the drawing on the left. Not all forms mirror in that way, but it is a really interesting kind of resonance. You might think about the actual shape of the writing that you put on the page, be it prose or otherwise. Prompts are really important. They're the questions we ask. For me, I believe that the questions we ask and the way that we ask them guides our creative process. Most scientists agree that 80% of the solution lies in asking the right question in the right way. And sometimes we have to ask the same question in more than one way to find our appropriate response. One exercise that I'm not going to give you today, but you might try, and I benefit from doing a lot. Actually, Sean Kernan, wonderful photographer and also a wonderful writer, introduced me to this in a workshop on creativity down in J. Mazel's bank building many years ago. And he brought in this writer who was used to teaching people of all ages, including very young people. And during our lunch break, our assignment was to go write 100 questions about the same thing. Well, of course, I'm a photographer, so I chose light. And it was really easy to come up with the first 6 questions. But the next 25 questions were harder, and I really had to stretch to get beyond 50. And by the time I finally got to 100, I found really different perspectives. And I also have to let that 3-year-old out and ask some really ridiculous questions like, what does the moon have for breakfast? Or who knows what it happens, what will come to your mind. Just engage in the process. Sometimes those really absurd questions will lead to a different insight. You know, if light could speak back, what would it say? And that might imply, does light have consciousness? What does that have to say about holograms? And that got me down a whole rabbit hole, and an entire series of images came out a year later. So the prompt that I want to offer you tonight is to do some quick writing. And it doesn't matter whether you use pencil, pen, or iPhone. And I'm going to do this timed, give you 3 minutes to write 3 times. So we'll have about 9 minutes to write here. We're coming back to this resource here that's up on my website, and I actually ask my students to do this exercise in some field workshops where I say, okay, for the next 15 minutes, we're only going to photograph focusing on the content. And then they'll come back and we'll say, how'd that feel? What kinds of things did you, what kinds of moves did you make? What kinds of pictures did you make? So, okay, now go back out there and focus only on the form of things. And we'll say, okay, how did that feel? Did it change your emotions? Did it change your mindset? Did you make different kinds of image? Invariably, the answer is yes. And then finally, change that over to feeling. You know, go with your gut. What's your emotion? And then, of course, the question between, so when you say feeling, do you mean all of our senses or do you mean emotion? It's very interesting in the English language to see that, feeling is so deeply connected with emotion, right? Which is often what people are responding to more than the content. I'm not going to make any political statements tonight. Nope, not going to do it. So the point of this next step for you to write is just take 3 minutes, and I'm going to pull an image up on the screen, and we're just going to write about the content. In the next 3 minutes, we're just going to write about the form, and the next, we're just going to write about the feeling, and I'll call it out. Just a highlight, if I'm looking at an image like this, I'm not going to start critiquing and saying, it's a little grainy. The edges, they can be cleaned up a little bit. It's too bad there's some motion blur. That is completely beside the point. It's really the content, the human drama, that is so riveting on something like this. In Jim Nachtwey's work, there's often a debate about, gosh, his compositions are so beautiful. Is the beauty getting away from the very difficult subjects that he's photographing? Or is it making an arresting image that gets people to pause and kind of cut through victim fatigue and to consider them, or is it lifting people up? There's no easy answer to that. It's a great debate. But if we were to look at Richard Mizrak's straight photographs, that he presents these abstract skies with these very historical place-based titles. The title is almost more representational. Utah, 1999, whatever it happens to be. Fascinated to see that our approach would vary substantially depending on the type of image that we're working. And you'll find this on the prompt that I'm offering you. Some images will support a statement about content, or a statement about form, or a statement about feeling more than others. For this prompt, I'm going to offer up a couple of images by my father. passed about a month after he received the award from the International Photography Hall of Fame. It was kind of wonderful to see him light up and get that. He really enjoyed it. And I want to thank the Hall of Fame for honoring him and in such a timely fashion as well. I think Jeff Sheewey, who was with us here, had visited, and Elizabeth was planning it, and she visited shortly after. So it was nice to see the community rally around him. I was going to look for something that was completely abstract. The apple is pretty abstract, but still an apple. And then something that's quite a bit more literal, the heel stone at Stonehenge. So for the next 3 minutes, I want to encourage you to pick one image, and I do recommend that for the next 9 minutes, you pick one of these two images and focus on it, just so that you experience how each one of these different prompts would apply to one image a little easier than another, and that you'll get different kinds of information that way. So here, wildly, some people will call it fever writing. Don't censor, don't edit. You don't have to share anything that you write. We don't anticipate finished work. In fact, I encourage you to get more out, particularly in this early stage, when you're first forming impressions. But each one of these prompts will encourage you to dig into it a little bit more. And you may be finding that you're pulling information that isn't necessarily in the picture, but that you experience. And that's another part of it. As you finish up some of this, let's say that you go and finish a piece of writing that you're doing, you might be called to do some research after the fact and bring even more to it, or maybe even return to the work later. So for the next 3 minutes, just write about the content. Pick one image and only write about the content, whether it be the stones and the grass and the sky, or the apple and the, well, would you put the seeds in there? It's your call. Go for it. And we'll come back to you in 3 minutes. Okay. So, quick question for you, and I do want you to write down at least one word or just a short phrase. How did that feel? What was the quality of your thought? It might have been up in your head. Some of you might have gone and done a quick Google search. Fair game. No rules here. You just need to come up with a piece of writing at the end that's kind of interesting or takes you on an interesting adventure. Uh, I want you to compare that to our next 3 minutes where we're just focusing on the form. So I encourage you again to write about the same image, but now only focus on the formal characteristics of the image. Is it light? Is it dark? What are the lines, shapes, textures? How sharp is it? So we're basically looking at color, luminosity, hue, and saturation. We're looking at detail, contour, and texture, or to borrow a phrase, the frequency of detail. Um, and the more formal elements of the thing. Watch what happens to your experience of the image and how it changes your mind in that. And I also encourage you to use the other sense beyond the five senses, the sense of imagination. A lot of times we'll need to reach into it. So if you want to activate the other five senses, which are quite interesting, you can imagine what the grass might smell like, what the grass might feel like, what sound might be whistling through the stones. Like, we're primarily orienting through our eyes, but we can imagine being there. And isn't that what so many photographers want, is to create this kind of virtual experience? So allow yourself to go to the other five senses as you lean into um, that. Great. Once again, I'm going to ask you to write down a word or a phrase that describes how that felt. What was your experience? How was it different than just focusing on the content? Did it add something? You might even ask, did one prepare you for the other? In many ways, what I've just done there to encourage you to reach out to the other 5 sentences is preparing you for our third prompt, which is to just respond to the feeling. I'll give you another play with language. There's two ways of defining something: saying what it is and saying what it's not. Feel free to say it's not. It doesn't smell like teen spirit. It certainly doesn't. It might smell like hypo or burrito. Um, for the next 3 minutes, just read about the feeling. I do want to encourage you to emphasize the emotion, kind of reach into what kinds of things are you emotionally attracted to? Also, what are you not attracted to? Uh, they're both equally interesting. And again, safe space. You don't have to share any of it, justify any of it. Just be this wild, free 3-year-old that just responds and notes things down. It's more of a mindfulness practice than it is an analysis. You don't have to justify any of this. Okay, you've just spent 10 minutes really looking at one image. When is the last time you did that? Have you ever done that? Have you done it with one of your images? You've probably done it with a collection of your images by just looking at them, experiencing them, moving around in the room. But have you ever reached out and kind of try to find the words that describe what's going on in them and what's going on in you? It can be useful to capture other words that you hear from other people as well. I know that I've learned a great deal about my images and how they're affecting people simply by listening during exhibits or slideshows, just catching it or catching some of their responses. All of the words can be quite useful. I want to finish up this exercise by giving us 2 more minutes to look at these 3 different collections of words. Maybe they're lists, maybe they're little paragraphs, maybe you've written a haiku, but really just a collection of words, phrases, sentences, but in 3 different categories: content, form, feeling. Now I want to encourage you to mix and match. That is, compare and contrast. Are there interesting lines in one set that would combine with words from another set? And could they create a kind of an interesting chemistry? They might reinforce one another. They compare. And you see how the form emphasizes the content or the feeling. They might contrast. You might say, oh, this creates an interesting tension. And we see, is that something to resolve in the image, or does it make it more kind of energetic and charged? So take a couple of minutes to just grab some of the phrases you already have and just combine them with words, phrases from the other list. Well, again, it could just be one word. And if you want to be a rascal and kind of bend the rules, it's one of the signs of creativity. Maybe you want to play thesaurus and say that you've got one word in one list, but you really like to just sort of tweak it and say something similar to that. You're going to use a thesaurus, you're going to use a synonym. That's fair game. Go for it. Take 2 minutes and see how the content, form, or feeling can all combine with each other in interesting ways. If you need a little bit more time, you certainly can spend as much as time as you like tonight, tomorrow. Maybe you want to sleep on it. A lot of things happen when you sleep. Even if you don't remember your dreams, we kind of work things out. I want to encourage you that if you've got an interesting phrase or a couple of lines that you'd like to share with the rest of the crew, that you pop it into the chat. We'll kind of scan through and enjoy it. And we may want to save the chat. Some of you may want to save the chat just to see the diversity of responses. I think that's one of the things that can be really interesting in smaller groups, where you can hear that people are responding to the same material in very different ways. Just like when we in a workshop go to the same location and come away and during reviews are so surprised at the different kinds of images that people make at the very same time in different situations. Um, while you're grabbing those 2 lines, I thought I would share a poem that I wrote in response to my father's apple here. This was written about 10 days after he passed in November. Um, I do want to emphasize that it took me many hours to. This was one of those poems that came out fast and was largely there, but that over a series of days I came back to it and kind of tinkered with it a little bit, and I even took it to my writing group, and after their feedback, made a few final tweaks as well. Finished writing takes a little bit of editing, even if it's like one of those Keith Richards songs that just sort of comes out in a few minutes. There's usually a little bit of refinement that can happen along the way. That by saying, I don't anticipate anybody's written a final finished poem. You've just gotten started, and this by offering something that is a little bit more finished. Be interesting to see if I edit it any more in the future. Anyway, this in response to Dad's apple, New York, 1964. How to turn an apple into a galaxy. Bring the outside inside. Savor desire without succumbing. Let it live in the center of your room. Allow days to flow. Focus a single eye. Blink illumination. Enter the darkest room. Shine radiance on silver-seeded sheets. Pass flesh through alchemical pools. Darken the fruit beyond recognition. Lift the liquid latent image's second sight. Let it curl dry. Loose the shadow back into light. Eat the thing you love. Part of what's going on there is I'm really literally detailing a process of making the photograph and the print. And I'm incorporating a few things I know. Dad didn't really see the potential of this image until he got into the darkroom and he printed it too dark. And one of the test prints was so dark, he said, wait, that looks like a starry sky. And it was far more interesting than the literal apple that he was printing the first time. There's a lot of other aspects of the photographic process that photographers will be able to read in there. And that's one of the fun things. You can bury these Easter eggs into your writing and offer surprises. The longer you look, the more you discover. Same thing with our images. This is the final project Dad and I were working on last summer and last fall, and it's a wonderful kind of blend of images and text. I made a lot of pancakes and a lot of hamburgers to do the interviews. And we get bits and pieces, and then it took, I don't know, 100,000 words and got it down into these short micro essays. And so it ends up being a conversation, which is exactly what the book is called, Caponigro Conversations. You can see more about that on my website, and on Two Ponds Press is their website. They're releasing this limited edition book. They've also released other publications like Joyce Tennyson's recent Gold Trees, and she worked with the poet Claire Milligan. Sig Harvey on the right, her books Cake and Eat Flowers. She does the writing herself. A lot of times artists will work with other writers. I facilitated Dad's conversations. Claire Milligan wrote poems in response to Joyce's. Sig wrote her text in response to that. Another really great collaboration by the same press, Richard Blanco and Jake Hessler in their book Boundaries. One of my absolute favorites. I've got a link to it up on the website. The Complaint of El Rio Grande, a place where I grew up. And again, because Richard brings his particular background, a poem I couldn't write. I encourage you to read it. Or if you want to hear Richard read, we did a similar presentation to this about a week ago, 10 days ago with Main Media. Richard was reading some of his poems, talking about poetry. You'll hear a lot of echoes. I've added some new things in here. And of course, Richard isn't here to read his poems and kind of answer questions in there. So that might be a really useful YouTube video. If you found this at all inspiring, that might be a really useful resource there. I'm always coming back to this quote by Thoreau. The question is not what you look at, but what you see. And isn't that true? When we point the lens, same tools. One of the reasons I got into photography was that apple picture. I thought it was fascinating. The literal transcription of the world could be so metaphoric, so poetic. How does that transformation happen? And then second, how do two people with the same tools stand shoulder to shoulder, photograph the same thing, and come up with such different images? How does our ghost get in that machine? I hope that these words tonight And your continued exploration with words can offer you a lot of food for thought on all of this. I'd be happy to answer questions on this, see where you want to go there, and see if there's any fun things in the chat, any fun surprises. Oh, yeah, there's some wonderful things in there. Coils of knowing, galaxies of ants. Ants, that's awesome. No, there's some fun things in that. Of course, the apple of the eye. Yes. Yeah. Rocks scream in anger. That'll be interesting to see where that goes. Yeah. Mm. Neat. I encourage you to save this chat. Remember, in the Zoom, you can save that chat and capture a few of these things there. And I want to open it up for questions. Anybody have questions, comments, things that they want to share? We're all ears. Pop them in the chat or.
Well, JP, let me just say it's, it took me back to when we were in White Sands and you encouraged us to do the same thing with the phone or a notepad and start writing. And my question for you is, how do you not get so cerebral and let the 3-year-old come out and play? I find myself, the first prompt that you gave us was fairly simple, and then by the end of the second, I started getting in my head, and and how do you discipline yourself to turn that off and let the freedom to kind of express go?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question and so important. It's something that we all just have to monitor the whole way through. Um, Free association is used in all kinds of creativity sessions in psychology, and it happens in the art too. We're kind of going with our gut. I encourage you to be thinking about that. Listening to your question and tracking it with. I'm currently going through a Jungian dream worker certification program. And one of the things that we're really trying to develop a taste for is when you enter into active imagination. Jung felt that and I'm going to borrow James Hillman's word here, that you needed to reanimate the image. That's fascinating. And I think this kind of writing and response does exactly that. Uh, Even when somebody else is writing about somebody else's images, it's breathing new life into it. It's giving it new breath and new layer into an already really layered experience. That you can start to sense in your brain when you start to get too thinky. I mean, you've already notified. I've started to get up in my head. It was all up in here. And one of the good things to do is kind of get grounded into the body. What are the other senses doing? And then the emotion. Not only what kind of emotion are you having, but where do you feel it in your body? These are all actually techniques people use in psychology as well, and specifically in dream interpretation. The post-Jungian Robert Bosnak has really interesting books on embodiment. So the body is this organ of sensation, which is this fountain of information. And if we get too much in our head, get back in the body.
Mhm.
I also think you can know when your focus starts getting very logical rather than loose and fluid, and you start relating to a lot of conventional knowledge. And you can actually feel that in your body too. But like, when you're getting thinky. I also think this is a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, a better way of saying it. I love to track and say, where did that idea come from? Oh, yeah, that's yesterday's experience. What about that idea? Oh, yeah, I read that in a book too. That's somebody else's idea. Like it got in there. It's mine now because it's circling around in my cranium, but it came from somewhere. And then you have these other kind of spontaneous things, and you know where the heck that came from, and your body kind of vibrates. Maybe it gets you in the gut in the right way, or in the heart, or you feel a certain loosening, or your fingers start to dance. And you're like, oh, pay attention to that. Like you're connecting there. And everybody's going to connect differently. And if you just pay attention to how your body is responding, it can tell you a lot about what's going on in your heart as well. I think there's a mindset and there's a heart set, and the two need to talk to each other. And I think the arts are a great way of getting that conversation happening. First, for the artist, that what's going on here, and second, between people, between artists, between the artist and viewers. If you don't want to call yourself an artist, everybody's an artist, everybody's creative.
I think that was a great take. I'm going to remember that, I'm going to give my head or my heart, whichever one, permission to allow the other one to come forth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Alex Rose asking, do you know why we have periods absent of any memory in dreams and how to make that connection in sleep? There's kind of two questions in that. First, nobody knows, including the top neuroscientists, exactly why we dream. There's a lot of theories, but nobody really knows. Right? And so all we know is there are periods where we are not conscious, right? There's no sense of awareness. We're neither lucid, we're not waking, we're not dreaming. It's just dial tone, right? We just don't know what's going on there. But there are lots of ways to remember um, sleep, and one of them is to write. My dream journal is the next note over from my poetry journal and my haiku journal. So part of it is just having a writing practice and showing your subconscious that you're paying attention and you do actually want to remember your dreams. There's a lot of books and resources out there. David Fontana is an easy, um, quick resource into that kind of stuff. But it's a very exciting field. Um, Yeah, and so I did an interesting thing just kind of as a side note here. I recently asked ChatGPT to pretend that it was a Jungian analyst and analyze a dream recently, and it did pretty well. It was really, really, really surprising. And so I said, okay, so what if I wrote a short little paragraph describing one of my surreal images of floating stones over a pink desert and tell ChatGPT to analyze the description of the image as if they're a Jungian analyst and pretend that it's a dream. It was really interesting to see the interpretation ChatGPT gave me based on the description, the written description of one of my images. All right. So there's all kinds of new possibilities today, right? The question, am I going to be giving any workshops on these types of writing? I've thought about it for years, and then so many times I feel like photographers don't prioritize this, don't feel like they want to, but I think there's a growing need for it, and it's in the back of my mind. I don't have concrete plans, but the best way to find out about it is on my website. My newsletter will tell you what's new coming up. But I do have plans to do more ekphrastic responses, like the next few that I'm having in museums across the state, and there may be more online as well. But there are a bunch of little resources on my website too, of just sort of activating. In fact, Arthur Meyerson, dear old Arthur, wonderful friend for all of us. And yeah, Elizabeth's smile there. That's Arthur, right? um, Said, hey, you mind if I use that resource you put up there on writing artist statements? I said, not at all. Yeah, use it as a prompt. He used it, get him going about writing something for his second book. So there are resources up there. Anybody else in there? Jeff Sheeby saluting me for taking writing workshops. I want to salute you, Jeff, for taking so many photography workshops. It's kind
Yeah,
of
right.
awesome. A life of learning. Yeah. No, I found it really, really rewarding. I started to take my own medicine. Years ago, I said, okay, so there's this idea of like an undergrad or a grad degree in photography, but there are these wonderful photographic workshops. What if you spent the entire summer at Main Media or at Santa Fe and you just selected the best workshops and you took 1 week with Sam Appel and the next one with Greg Gorman and the next one with, I mean, what a fabulous education, right? And that doesn't have to happen only in one summer. And so I am, since COVID, I've been taking a lot of writing workshops, kind of really digging in. I've written all my life. I've written for 20 years, probably over 1,000 articles on how to and on creativity, but I never really gave myself the time to write creatively. And I'm finding that it's dovetailing in my work. I'm understanding my work, and I know what I want to do with my book publications moving forward. And it's changed the way that people are responding to exhibits because I'm including not formal artist statements, but little pieces of prose or a little poem. And I find I'm having a different discussion with people when I'm there, and I'm eavesdropping on different discussions. And one of the things I constantly look for when people are going through an experience like that is the quality of their breath. And if I hear somebody's breath is caught, whether it's text or image, I pay attention. They're having an experience. Or if
Mm.
I just sense the rhythm changing, hey, just watch. Don't interrupt that. Just watch. get a sense of the kind of experience you're having. And we can do the same ourselves. It's another way of, back to Elizabeth's question, like monitoring, where am I on this process? Am I too much up here? Am I too far down here? Where do I want to be in that? Just watch the quality of your breathing. And breathing is one of those things that we can control. If we feel like we're hyperventilating, well, slow it down. I do that as well when I'm photographing. I think the quality of your breath while you're photographing tells you a lot about the kind of experience you're having. And sometimes I just need to slow myself the heck down. And other times I'm just absolutely elated that I'm, the blood's pumping, the iceberg is calving, like, yeah, bring it on. So, breath, whether you put words to that breath or not, pay attention to your breath. Yeah. Good. Any last questions?
I think that people have the ability to unmute themselves and ask, so don't be shy. I don't think you have to put it in the chat per se.
I'm hoping more tonight that I don't have the goal that anybody's going to come away with a finished piece of writing. They might get something they started and they want to follow up on. They might have gotten the bug to chase it a little bit further. But I'm hoping that everybody's got a sense of how powerful words can be as tools to unlock different perspectives, just like different lenses or filters, that they give you a different perspective, and that you have agency. You can choose different words, you can choose different questions, you can choose different ways of responding, and really control the flow of your experience, or rather dance with it. I think controlling, probably you can dance with it better.
I do find it interesting that most people selected the apple as their subject, at least the ones that wrote into the chat,
Mm,
as did I. But um,
such a strong image. It's absolutely one of my favorite photographs, period, of all time. I know. Yeah. And so evocative.
yeah.
Yeah. I love being able to share that. Yeah, Dad actually did eat it after he photographed it. Sometimes he would let this peach sit around for way too long and it would start smelling ripe. You gonna eat that, Dad? Not yet. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. I'll eat it tomorrow. Call him. Hey, did you eat it? I ate it. How was it? Well, you needed a good strong cup of coffee, but the experience was great.
That's great.
Yeah. They don't have the ability to unmute, says,
Okay.
oh, look at that. I'm seeing two different.
People raise their hands, I can unmute them, or if anyone has a question.
Hmm. Like Shivis, I do think photographers are often afraid to write about their work, failing to understand how important your own writing can have powerful context to give a powerful context to the work. I completely agree. Um, and just to follow up, Jeff, I can't tell you how many dinners I sat through as a kid where Dad and his compadres would be complaining about somebody else wrote about their work, or somebody else said about their work. And I was like, as I went through my art education, hey, did you ever notice how anybody who writes about Van Gogh kind of has to refer to his journals? Because he said some things about his work. The other part of it is, I also noticed so many photographers have this stock of their key stories in their life. Like Dad had 6 to 10 stories he would constantly repeat. Arnold Newman had, a dozen stories. And it was just the dozen stories that he would repeat, whether it's in his slideshow or whether it's at the dinner table. It's like kind of his shtick, but they were also sharing kind of key moments in their lives. And like, so if we took the time to kind of flesh that out and kind of really get it down and kind of hone our key stories, wouldn't we be more effective presenters, more effective communicators, like more able to answer things in an interview, to make it more entertaining and also insightful, if we just find out what our story is? And very often that's writing. Now, maybe you're not using a pen, maybe you're dictating into the phone. Some people prefer to just sort of talk it first. Great, do it. Talk in an audio, transcribe that, or even sit down. So many times I find that, in the 49 interviews that are up on my website, I used to write for Camera Arts and View Camera and have these longer conversations with photographers. Um, in that conversation, a lot of things would come to light, and very often people would want to use excerpts, or in Arthur Myerson's case, he later said, "Hey, do you mind if we use the interview for the text on his first book, The Color of Light?" Um, Sitting down with somebody, having that conversation can be a great way to get things started. And if you don't have somebody you're really interested in having a conversation with like that, start it with yourself, or start it with a work of art. Right. So we just spent 10 minutes plus on one of Dad's work. Spend it on your own work. Like, see what happens. Play with this stuff. And remember to keep that kid alive, what Elizabeth was mentioning. But, if you get too thinky, okay, so that's what happened that day. You know, go get a shot of tequila and come back. I love this, Paul. There's a way in which this all fuses with so much going on in my life. It's overwhelming in the best way. Exactly. I mean, this is a way of kind of connecting and integrating a lot of things, and a lot more levels than just up in the head, also in the heart, also in the gut. Just this is staying active in process. Absolutely. It's kind of wonderful. And all you have to really do is tune in. Just like the lens, the camera is a way of tuning in. It's a passport. It's an excuse to go places, do things you wouldn't ordinarily. But it's also the discipline in the best sense of the word, not as in a eat your Wheaties, but the discipline of you've got a craft. You can look deeply. You've practiced this. Pretty much everybody who's showing up here has a pretty strong photographic practice, and they know how wonderful it is to look at the world um, carefully. I
Mm.
love that word, carefully, full of care. It's like, what a wonderful way to be. And we have these tools that kind of unlock our ability to be these different ways. Words can do the same kinds of things. Yeah, I like this one too. Um, Teresa was saying, no, it's just, yeah, it is Teresa. As a printmaker from Alberta, Canada, I write a lot of artist statements and found this to open my eyes and ears to other ways of seeing and writing.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is so different than the kind of artist statement that I was. They didn't really teach us how to do this in art school, but they implied that we had to. And then when I finally had my first exhibition, I was like, okay, okay, write that artist statement. I was resisting, I was my father's son, right? But I took it on, and I actually learned something about my work and myself, both as a result of putting together a piece of writing. It was still in the artist statement, but it worked well enough that a teacher at Stanford can say, "Hey, you mind if I read this to my class?" Hey, well, nice compliment. Okay. But it wasn't the poem that I just read you, and I'm finding writing creatively is unlocking other ways of being as well. And it's not a one or the other. It's another lens in your toolkit. Great.
Maybe we can think about doing a workshop with IPHF and you in Maine or St. Louis or Santa Fe or
Yeah.
White Sands and
Oh, no,
incorporate.
your words got in my ear. I'm already thinking about it.
And I think incorporating all this where we can give the permission to the heart and to the head and feel and write and really release the shutter and ourselves and flow
Yeah. Yeah.
um and bring it collectively would be a beautiful workshop, just to allow ourselves that self-expression to the maximum. I
Yeah.
did a workshop several years ago in Italy. It was called Out of Your Head, and it wasn't a photographic workshop. It was getting in touch with your emotions and things that are holding you back that we carry a lifetime, of
Hmm.
this baggage with us and how to let go of it and really be true to ourselves. And I think, photography needs that so that your images could create that emotion and that thought and capture that breath that you see when people stop and look and pause at your images.
Yeah.
Um, I think it
Yeah.
would be a great, great thing to put together. So let's chat.
Okay, we'll do that. I, I totally agree. I always tell my students, it's not photography that makes your photographs interesting. It's you. So this is personal development. And I always remember sitting next to Jay Maisel during one of those Photoshop World Art of nights where we were supposed to present our work for 15 minutes. Joe McNally has just done this great quick presentation. If you want to make more interesting photographs, go to more interesting places. And Jay follows him immediately with his cigar. If you want to make more interesting photographs, be more interesting. Okay. But this is one way of saying, wow. Honestly, I think this really helps get to another quote that I just lived by. Picasso, an artist knows more than he thinks he knows.
Mm,
Okay, so if I know more than I think I know, how do I get at that? How do I make a space for that? This is one way.
right. Becky says, sign me up for that workshop.
All right. All right. Well,
Well,
good.
I want
I hope this is
to,
time well spent.
yeah, it was great. And I don't really want to take up much more of your time. You've been very generous with it. And I just want to say thank you so much for giving us, a full cup and then some.
Thank you.
It's always, so inspirational, moving, and just really a pleasure to hear you speak and your thoughts and the emotion and thoughtfulness I think that you put in your presentations is just remarkable. So I just want to say thank you for coming on to IPHF. It's an honor to have you, and we look forward to more conversations.
Super. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thanks everyone for coming tonight.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And stay tuned to IPHF for more workshops, lectures. Come join us in Indianapolis for our 60th anniversary. If you want to get involved and become a board member, volunteer, lecturer, instructor, reach out to us. We do need for people to nominate folks like JP's dad, Paul Caponigro, that was inducted last year. This year we're doing inducting Keith Carter, David Burnett, Shelley Metzer. There's a list of folks that will be inducted in October. The nomination process is open all year long. All you have to do is go on iphf.org, nominate an educator that you know that has dedicated their life to photography, a photographer that is deserving of recognition, to be in this elite group of really masters of this craft. So if you think of anybody that deserves the recognition and the honor of being in the Hall of Fame, please go on iphf.org, fill out the simple form and nominate them so we can vote. Voting will be coming very soon, and hopefully we'll announce the class of 2026 at the induction, October 2025. So we do look forward to the people that folks are wanting to nominate. We love reviewing them and putting them on the list out for vote. Thanks everybody for joining. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, JP. It's always wonderful to see you. Please give my love to Artie.
Thank you. Best
Be
of
well.
Ken. You too.